History holes.
Part 1. The Structure of Control, Forging French Indochina. Welcome back to History Holes. The conquest is over, the armies have fallen silent, and the Nguyen Emperor sits on his throne in Hue, a king without a kingdom. For the first time in nearly 1,000 years, the land of Dai Nam is under the complete control of a foreign power. But conquest is one thing, ruling is another entirely. The French now face the immense task of governing a vast, complex, and deeply resentful population. This is the story of how they built their colonial state, a meticulously designed machine of control and extraction that would reshape Vietnamese society forever. The architect of this new order was Paul Doumer, who served as governor-general from 1897 to 1902. A man of immense ambition and administrative genius, Doumer was not content with the messy ad hoc system of control that existed. He envisioned a single, unified, and profitable colonial empire. He brought the disparate territories together under a centralized government in Hanoi, creating a single budget for the entire Indochinese Union. To fund this new state, he established powerful government monopolies on salt, alcohol, and most lucratively, opium. The revenue from these monopolies was staggering, and Doumer poured it into massive public works projects. He oversaw the construction of railways, bridges, and roads, including the iconic steel bridge over the Red River in Hanoi that would one day bear his name. These projects were not for the benefit of the Vietnamese people. They were the arteries of the colonial economy, designed to move troops and transport resources from the interior to the sea with maximum efficiency. A cornerstone of French rule was the strategy of divide and rule. They deliberately dismantled the unified country that Gia Long had forged. Vietnam was partitioned into 3 distinct administrative regions. Cochinchina, in the south, was a direct colony, governed by French law and represented in the French parliament. Annam, the central region including the imperial capital of Hue, was a protectorate, as was Tonkin in the north. Each region had a different legal status, different tax systems, and different levels of French intervention. This policy was designed to break any sense of national unity and deepen the pre-existing regional tensions, making it easier for a small number of French administrators to govern a large population. At the heart of this system, in the gilded halls of the Forbidden Purple City in Hue, sat the Nguyen Emperor. He was a sovereign in name only, a living relic maintained by the French to provide a veneer of legitimacy. While he performed ancient Confucian rituals and presided over a powerless court, the real authority was wielded by the French resident superior. The emperor's decrees were meaningless without the resident's stamp of approval. The dragon throne had become a puppet stage, and the Son of Heaven was now a subject in his own palace, a symbol of a proud and independent past that was being systematically erased. Part 2. The Price of Progress, Economic Exploitation and Social Change. Paul Doumer's administrative machine was ruthlessly efficient, and its primary purpose was to extract wealth. Dai Nam was no longer a kingdom. It was a portfolio of assets to be exploited for the glory and profit of France. This new economic order, cloaked in the language of progress and development, was built on a foundation of coercion and human suffering. The French targeted the country's rich natural resources, creating an economy of extraction that funneled wealth out of Vietnam and into the pockets of French investors. In the north, they exploited the vast coal deposits of Tonkin, while in the south, they cleared huge swaths of land to create sprawling rubber plantations in Cochinchina. Life for the Vietnamese who worked in these colonial enterprises was brutal. Labor was often acquired through a system of forced recruitment, a thinly veiled form of indentured servitude. On the rubber plantations, the conditions were hellish. Workers, often landless peasants, tricked or coerced into signing contracts, labored from dawn until dusk under the watch of cruel overseers. Malnutrition, disease, and corporal punishment were rampant. The saying, "The rubber oozes white like latex, but it is red with the blood of laborers," became a grim reality for thousands. The mines of Tonkin were no better, with workers facing constant danger from collapses and lung disease. This system of exploitation created immense profits for French companies, but left a legacy of deep bitterness and anger. The colonial economy also shattered the traditional fabric of rural life. Under the old system, the village was the center of Vietnamese society, a self-sufficient community with its own traditions and social structures. The French, with their heavy taxes, monetization of the economy, and seizure of communal lands, broke this system apart. Peasants who couldn't pay their taxes in cash were forced to sell their ancestral lands, often to a new class of wealthy Vietnamese landlords who collaborated with the French. This created a massive population of landless peasants, forced to become tenant farmers paying exorbitant rents or to leave their villages entirely to seek work on the plantations and in the factories of the new colonial cities. The village, once a source of stability, became a place of poverty and social dislocation. Out of this disruption, a new social order began to emerge. Colonial cities like Saigon and Hanoi swelled with new inhabitants, becoming centers of both French power and Vietnamese adaptation. A new Western-educated elite arose, Vietnamese who attended French schools, learned the French language, and filled the lower ranks of the colonial bureaucracy. They were a class caught between two worlds, benefiting from the colonial system, but often treated as second-class citizens by their French masters. Perhaps the most profound change was the promotion of Quoc Ngữ, the Romanized script for the Vietnamese language, by the French. As they gradually dismantled the thousand-year-old Confucian examination system, Quoc Ngữ began to replace classical Chinese characters as the primary medium of literacy. This created a new generation of intellectuals, disconnected from the Confucian past, but armed with a tool that would eventually be used to forge a new, modern national identity and challenge the very colonial power that had promoted it. Part 3. The Awakening, Early Nationalist Movements. The French colonial system was designed for control and profit, but in its brutal efficiency, it inadvertently created the very forces that would seek to destroy it. The deep-seated grievances born from exploitation and the social upheaval of a society turned upside down gave rise to a powerful spirit of resistance. At first, this resistance looked to the past, a desperate, final cry from the old Confucian order. Following the French seizure of Hue in 1885, a faction of the court led by the regent Ton Tut Tuit fled into the mountains with the young Emperor Ham Nghi. From their jungle hideouts, they issued a proclamation calling on the people to rise up and aid the king, Kun Vuong. This movement was led by the scholar gentry, the traditional Mandarin elite, who waged a fierce but ultimately doomed guerrilla war against the French for over a decade. They fought with heroic determination, but their goal was to restore a monarchy that was already powerless and an old order that was rapidly becoming irrelevant. The capture of Ham Nghi in 1888 effectively broke the back of the movement, marking the end of traditional monarchist resistance. From the ashes of the Kun Vuong movement, a new generation of nationalists emerged. They were modern men who understood that restoring the old dynasty was no longer a viable path. They looked not to the past, but to the future, and they were bitterly divided on how to get there. Two towering figures came to represent the two great competing paths for Vietnamese nationalism in the early 20th century. The first was Phan Boi Cho, a passionate revolutionary who believed that independence could only be won through armed struggle and with the help of foreign allies. He saw the recent victory of Japan over Russia in 1905 as a monumental event. An Asian nation had defeated a great European power. Inspired, he launched the Dong Du, Go East movement, a clandestine effort to send young, brilliant Vietnamese students to Japan to learn modern military science, technology, and political thought. His goal was to build a core of trained revolutionaries who would one day return to lead a popular uprising and expel the French. The second figure was Phan Cho Trinh, a reformer who argued that Phan Boi Cho's approach was dangerously misguided. He believed that Vietnam's primary weakness was not a lack of weapons, but a deep internal sickness. In his eyes, the antiquated monarchy, the corrupt mandarinate, and an uneducated populace were the real enemies. His Duy Ton Reformation movement advocated for a radical social transformation from within. He called for abolishing the monarchy, embracing Western democratic ideals, and educating the masses. He argued that seeking foreign help was trading one master for another, and that true, lasting independence could only be achieved when the Vietnamese people had modernized themselves. These competing ideas electrified the intellectual landscape. The reformist spirit found a powerful expression in the Tonkin Free School, Dong King Yetuk, established in Hanoi in 1907. It was a revolutionary institution that broke from the old Confucian curriculum, teaching Quoc Ngu, French, and Western science, and it quickly became a hotbed of nationalist agitation. This intellectual ferment, combined with widespread peasant anger over forced labor and crushing taxes, exploded in 1908. A series of massive, non-violent tax revolts swept through the central provinces, while in Hanoi, a failed plot to poison the French garrison revealed the growing radicalism. The French response to this wave of unrest was swift and brutal. They shut down the schools, arrested hundreds of activists, and executed the leaders. Both the revolutionary and the reformist paths were crushed, ending this first, hopeful chapter of modern nationalism and driving the next generation of patriots underground and toward more extreme ideologies. Part 4, War, Disillusionment, and a New Generation, 1914-1945. The brutal French suppression of the 1908 uprisings drove the nationalist movements underground, but it could not extinguish the desire for independence. The outbreak of World War I in Europe would unexpectedly accelerate the nationalist cause. The French, desperate for manpower, recruited nearly 100,000 Vietnamese soldiers and workers to serve on the Western Front. For these men, it was a profound and transformative experience. They witnessed the horrors of modern warfare, but they also saw the inner workings of European society, its technologies, its political ideas, and crucially, its vulnerabilities. They returned to Vietnam with a new perspective, no longer seeing their colonial masters as invincible gods, but as fallible men. After the war, a new wave of political activity emerged, this time centered in the French colony of Indochina. The Constitutionalist Party, a moderate group of Western-educated Vietnamese elites, sought to gain more rights and political autonomy by working within the colonial system. They used newspapers and political campaigns to call for reforms, hoping to persuade the French that a partnership would be more beneficial than pure domination. But their efforts were met with intransigence and condescension. The French had no intention of sharing real power, and the failure of the constitutionalists to achieve any meaningful change led to widespread disillusionment among a new generation of activists. If reform was impossible, then revolution seemed the only path left. This turn towards radicalism produced two major new organizations. The first was the Vietnamese Nationalist Party, formed in 1927 and modeled on Sun Yat-sen's Kuomintang in China. They advocated for a violent overthrow of French rule and attempted to launch a nationwide uprising with the Yen Bai Mutiny in 1930. The revolt failed spectacularly and was crushed with merciless French reprisals, effectively decapitating the party's leadership. The second, and far more consequential, movement was coalescing around a young, enigmatic revolutionary named Nguyen Ai Quoc, who would one day be known to the world as Ho Chi Minh. Having traveled the world and been a founding member of the French Communist Party, he skillfully united various competing Marxist groups. In 1930, the same year as the Yen Bai Mutiny, he founded the Indochinese Communist Party, an organization built on a foundation of strict discipline, clandestine organization, and a powerful international ideology. With the scholar-patriots defeated and the moderate reformers disillusioned, it was this new communist movement that would prove to be the most resilient and ultimately successful force in the long, arduous struggle for Vietnamese independence. I thank you very much for joining us on this journey. Please leave a like and subscribe if you want more. If you feel like it, tell us what else you'd like to hear. See you on the next episode.